Hello and welcome to the Pre-Chiro podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Ben Glass, and today we're making a professional chiropractor connection out in Colorado with Dr. Madhav Gramke. Can you get us started by just introducing yourself and also reflecting on that moment in life when you decided you wanted to become a chiropractor? What was it that attracted you to this path?
Yeah, so I was doing some my undergrad studies at the University of Central Florida. I was studying health sciences because I was really interested in actually bodybuilding at the time. I don't have the biceps quite to make it in bodybuilding, but at least I had the kind of the mind for it, maybe. And I just really got fascinated with the human body. And I had a friend; he was like a mentor figure, friend, mentor figure to me, and he had been suffering from migraines for a very long time. And he saw a chiropractor, and within like two adjustments, the migraines disappeared and never came back. Typical story for us, maybe, but at the time, it totally blew my mind. I was like, "What? He just like touched you, and then they disappeared? Like, what? That's crazy." And so he was doing a health talk. He did like bi-weekly health talks at his office. Uh, and so I got invited by my friend to go, and I heard the chiropractic story for the first time, and I was like, wow, that just makes so much sense when you explain it that way. It's just that's so cool, and it makes sense. And he had a book on his coffee table, on his waiting room table, maybe this big, full of testimonials, full of pages and pages, and just it was unbelievable. All kinds of crazy stuff of stuff that he had helped people with. So that was kind of the moment that I was sold. I was like, okay, cool. Well, I followed up a little bit. I did some shadowing, between classes and stuff. I would go hang out with him in his office, and yeah, that was pretty much it. That's what sold me.
And
So
can
then
you kind of reflect on, what your major was in college and the path that you were on before you even started thinking about chiropractic, and also just in what way that mentorship dynamic served you as a college student?
yeah. So I was majoring in health sciences, which turned out to be perfect actually, because I got plenty of anatomy and physiology and biology and epidemiology and like basic science classes like this. And I think I chose health sciences because of my interest in the human body, but I didn't really quite know where I was going to go with it. But I felt that health sciences was broad enough that it could kind of get me anywhere I wanted to go. I had a lot of friends who went to medical school, friends who went to PT school. There's only like three other chiropractic people at UCF though, so I thought that was kind of strange maybe. But anyway, I was proud to be one of those three pre-chiro people. And yeah, yeah.
And can you kind of describe, once you decided you were going to go to chiropractic school, how you began preparing yourself, how it sort of settled with your friends and family to let them know you were going to go become a chiropractor, and just kind of like how you thought it was going to go compared to like once you got to campus and started the program, how it actually went, what were some surprises you encountered, and that kind of thing?
Okay. So um, to prepare, I think I just kind of focused on learning as much as I could in my classes, especially the ones that I felt that were really relevant. Like the anatomy and the physiology, even the epidemiology. I felt that it was relevant and that I should be paying attention. So I just kind of tried to focus on, not even necessarily good grades, but I tried to focus on learning as much as I could while I was finishing up my undergraduate studies. Um, and also hanging out with chiropractors. So I didn't do a ton of shadowing, which I probably should have done more. I wish I would have done maybe a little bit more, but that's okay. I shadowed a couple chiropractors, just to like be in their office and see how their flow was, and see if I could sort of imagine myself doing that on a daily basis kind of thing. And of course, like they were all so happy with their jobs. It didn't seem like they were faking it. It really seemed like they were just having fun, and like helping people and having that satisfaction of helping people. And so if I wasn't sold before, I was definitely sold, after all of that shadowing work. Um, and then when I got to Life University, because my first mentor, that first guy who I met, he told me that I should go to Life University because that's where he went. So, and it is a good school. I'm happy I went there, although there are other good schools as well, of course. But so when I got to Life University in Marietta, in Atlanta, I would say it was probably about maybe par for the course of what I expected, I suppose. Like we got started with medical terminology and like, I don't even remember. It was just like some really sort of like basic intro courses and try to, get the flow of how the quarter system was because I was used to a semester system. Maybe that was one thing that took some mm, like how do I say, like accommodating in my mind, working on 11 weeks instead of working on like 18 weeks or whatever it was for the semester. It felt very fast. But yeah, it felt good. It felt like I was kind of in the swing. Like,
Well, I guess just to center our voice on the prospective student audience or even the current student audience, like what were some insights you gained or something you became passionate about as a student? How would you describe the experience just to give them some insights into what it's like? How would you describe the pathways that you looked at, the ones you maybe went down a little bit, ones you went down a lot deeper, and then what you ultimately settled with as a combination of different things that you were really attempting to develop as skill sets so that when you graduated, you would have them refined and polished at a professional level?
totally. Okay. So mm, I definitely tried to focus on, again, learning as much as I could, you know, like genuinely taking the classes seriously, because I know a lot of my classmates didn't really do that so much. But I tried to take it seriously because I was like, no, this is important. I need to like learn this stuff. So that was a big focus of mine. And I felt that just very similarly to my experience in my undergraduate studies, the university is really what you make of it. It's really what you make of it. You can do it in all kinds of ways. And so the way that I did my best to was to just kind of focus on the studies and not so much on the parties. A little more on the studies and a little less on the parties. And then, so just backing up just a little bit, while I was just about to graduate from the University of Central Florida, I had a cousin who was a naturopathic doctor, and he told me, okay, you're going to be a chiropractor. You need to learn your anatomy. He said, that's important for chiropractic. You got to know your anatomy. And he said, the best way to learn your anatomy is to teach it. So he said, so you need to be a tutor. You need to be an anatomy tutor. That's what he told me. And I was like, okay, cool. That makes sense. Yeah. Anatomy, I got to know it because that's what I'm working with. And, I get the flow of logic. That's cool. But I'm like this kind of like introverted kid. And I couldn't really see myself teaching in front of a group, but I liked his advice so much that I just decided to go for it. And then, so I was teaching spinal anatomy and musculoskeletal anatomy as a supplemental instructor, a tutor basically. But I taught classrooms full of people instead of one-on-one. And I got super hooked. Like I got super hooked, one, on the process of teaching itself, because I found it to be super fun to be able to get in front of people and explain what I have in my brain. It was just fun, and people listened, and that was cool. That was satisfying that people were getting something out of it, and then of course I got paid to learn, because just like my cousin said, the best way to learn is to teach. And so I literally got paid to learn and got paid to sort of like practice public speaking also, because public speaking as a chiropractor, depending how you do it, can be very helpful skill. So I kind of like learned how to do that too, and so, yeah, that was kind of it. Like I found myself also being like a facilitator in an adjusting club we had an MLS club on campus, and so I was kind of, teaching that from the student side also. And yeah, I just like really got into teaching, even though I didn't really know everything super duper well. It was a great process. I really liked it, and I learned a lot, and it seems like the people who I taught learned a lot too. So yeah, that was kind of like where my focus was. And of course, not everybody can go that path, but for the prospective students listening, maybe if you feel brave, maybe you can try something like that. Getting paid to learn, right? Being a tutor. So.
It's important that students challenge themselves. Absolutely. I mean, that's the whole premise of this project, is trying to put students in the shoes of people who have either done it before or going through it. We have some student interviews here, but to also just show them what's possible. You didn't know that you would be teaching anatomy. You didn't know you'd be facilitating adjusting clubs, but that's what you ended up doing. And when you look back on your chiropractic student years, those were two of the biggest things you might have done as far as the story of what you really were able to experience outside of passing your classes and preparing for boards and getting your license and completing your graduation sort of requirements. Can you kind of just talk about reflecting back, being a teacher, studying the science really in depth, what that really requires of you, beyond just what's asked of you of the tests and exams that typical classes use?
Yeah. One example that always comes to mind, I don't know why this always comes to mind, but it does. I was taking some what is it called? Board review classes with Irene Gold. I highly recommend them, by the way. Irene Gold is a great board review course. And so the instructor, like constantly, instructors, especially one that I remember in particular, but they all did this to some extent, probably 50 to 100 times per afternoon, they would say, this is how it is on the test, and this is how it is in real life. And oftentimes they were not the same. And I was just like, whoa, like, it's just so interesting to hear teaching being put that way, like, this is how it is on the test and this is how it is in real life. 50 to 100 times an afternoon, the instructors would say it like this. And so it's super easy as a student to disregard the second half of that statement, and say, oh, I just need to know what's on the boards. Don't bother me with this extra info. I only have so much space in my brain, which isn't true, by the way. Oh, I only have so much space. Oh, I can only handle the first half, which is what's on the exam. That's all I need to focus on. If you're paying attention the whole time that you're in school, not even just in those board exams, but the whole time you're in school, you have opportunities like this to learn, and of course, sometimes it is the same. Sometimes in real life and on the test, it's the same. But sometimes it's not, and so keeping that open focus to like learn some of those differences, and why would there be a discrepancy from the test onto real life? That's a really interesting question, I think, too, to sort of like be thinking about. But yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say is that there's a lot of opportunities all over the place to be learning like the real stuff, so to speak, instead of just the test stuff. I don't know if that's kind of what you were looking for an answer, but
I'm not looking for anything for answers. I'm really just wanting some transparency, because when I was a prospective student, even when I was a current student, I didn't feel as though there was enough candid conversations taking place between chiropractors about what life was like in chiropractic school, what were the highlights of people's chiropractic journeys, and how I could potentially see myself going those different directions. I'm just trying to uncover the way that chiropractors are thinking, the way that they're reflecting on their time in school, and we'll eventually get into real world practice. But as we're on this topic, can you kind of just keep unpacking what the student culture was like at Life University for you through your lens? Why you gravitated towards MLS as a club, what the culture of MLS was like, what that involvement in that club did to translate into real world practice, and then maybe also we can now transition into the real world through this answer.
Cool. So I found that the culture on campus was very positive overall, and I really enjoyed the student culture as well as the faculty culture, for that matter. Of course, there was instructors that we were frustrated with, but for the most part, even the faculty, they were great, and the students were definitely great. Just like I kind of said before, the university experience is what you make of it, really. And so there's a lot of opportunities to go in a lot of different directions as far as the culture goes too. You find like little pockets of people who like to do the parties, and pockets of people that are really like obsessed with building out their business plan after they graduate. And then you have people who are really obsessed with like learning the sports chiropractic stuff, and they're just like, you find these little pockets of people who have these obsessions. And I would suggest to be very intentional about which pockets of people you hang out with, because that'll totally change everything about your experience and what kind of tools you'll have after you graduate. Maybe a week isn't a big deal, but a week turns to 2 weeks, turns to a month, turns into a year, turns into 4 years, and before you know it, you know, the time how you spent it is how you spent it. So I sort of did my best to hang out with the pockets of people who were, interested in really making a positive impact after they graduated. And of course, I had my fun too. You can't like be, or I felt that I couldn't be too obsessive, otherwise I might go a little crazy, because the classes are so intense enough that it's good to unwind a little bit. But yeah, I liked my friends who were focused, and I also liked my friends who liked to have fun. And I gravitated towards MLS because of Arno's philosophy of healing, I guess you could say. For those who, I don't know if you've talked to MLS to your people, are they familiar, or can I talk a little bit about that also? Okay, cool. So for those that aren't familiar with MLS, it's sort of the brainchild, if you will, of Arno Bernier, and he's one of the greatest chiropractors I think that's ever lived, maybe. And his philosophy is, to sort of get it in dense chunks, healing instead of focusing on enhancing the healing instead of focusing on fighting the disease. That made a lot of sense to me. Number two is being gentle with your approach, like your hands-on approach, like when you touch somebody, to be gentle instead of to be like forceful and like, yeah, forceful. Being gentle instead of being forceful. And listening, he emphasized listening so much, and that just makes sense to me. Like, you have to listen before you can know what to do, and trusting your ability to listen, and then doing adjustments in a very specific way. That's maybe like a if yeah, a quick rundown of the MLS philosophy, and all of those points just really resonated with me a lot. And so I spent every week for a good 3.5 years at the MLS club, and then I went to the seminars, of course, and stuff, and it was great. The culture there was awesome, so positive, so welcoming. Like, just really great people. I find go to MLS club, or Love Club as some people call it. Is one of my favorite. Is one of my favorite clubs I participated in, and I did quite a few, but that's one of the ones that's most near and dear to my heart for sure.
And can you maybe just speak about how you found John, who connected us, and where you were at in life when you discovered him, and maybe how his work relates to MLS, and just kind of how you moved from graduating into the real world? Did you practice? You got into teaching more anatomy. Can you kind of break that down too?
Sure, sure. So John Martinez, another mutual friend of ours, uh, might have had just as big of an impact on me as Arno did. Um, I found John's work, I don't know, maybe like halfway through my time in school, and John is a student of Arno's, if I'm not mistaken. I'm pretty sure he is, and so he kind of like took Arno's work, and I don't want to say took it further, because Arno took it pretty dang far, but maybe we can say John put his his soul into it and his twist onto it, and then of course he's not just influenced by Arno, he has his other things, and so somehow he blended into what he calls pneuma, the pneuma approach, and it's amazing. It's truly amazing. I feel like when we talk about the art of chiropractic, I don't know who embodies that more than John, that I have seen at least. You know, he is an artist. Like that is what John is, and I just love that. I live maybe an hour and a half from Denver, so I have the opportunity to go get adjusted by him. And you know, I got adjusted by him a bunch while I was a student, and then after I graduated, since I live here, I have that opportunity too. And it's never been the same ever, not even a little bit. Like out of the however many times I've been adjusted, he's never ever done the same thing on me. And every time I walk in his office, he pulls out this new thing. I'm like, where does this come from? Like, what on earth? How? But he would probably say something like, "Oh, I just follow. I just listen and follow." That might be something. That might be an answer that he would give. What? So I just really liked John's work. Continue to like John's work. I admire him probably more than any other chiropractor, especially as an adjuster. His skill as an adjuster is absolutely phenomenal.
Can you kind of unpack that even deeper for students to continue learning about Numa? Just because we don't have enough substantive dialogue around what Numa is, what seminars you've taken, maybe some reflections on what they were like, or kind of the delivery or the structure of the seminars, or just working with John over time, maybe different trips you've gone on with him?
Sure, sure. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to go on a trip yet, but I am planning on it. And actually, we're talking about him taking one of my classes, and maybe, and then I go on one of his retreats, and that might be the way that we do it. And we'll get into my classes in a little bit, I'm sure. But yeah, Numa, it's kind of tough to describe it, I think, because it's so amorphous, you know, and it's so different every time. And like you can take the same just like you get adjusted from him and it's always different. You can take the same seminar, you know, I think he has like maybe 3 or 4 that he does. And even if you just take one and you repeat that one, it's always different again. And so it's a little bit tough to like say what it is explicitly, but maybe like implicitly, you know, we can maybe listening and following, you know, to kind of like repeat myself a little bit. Listening and following might be like at the heart of it, and following, listening and following the body, of course, you know, like the field and the person's body on the table, listening and following that, and being comfortable to go into these unknown places and just go and going for it. You know, like I remember John one time he said something like when he was first sort of developing this, he would listen, follow, and he'd get himself in these like weird contorted positions that he was like, how did I get here? Like I'm like bent over in half, you know, like over this person. And then the person's body says, okay, now go, you know, like input. And so, and then he would do like, cut, and then it would be beautiful, right? So I don't know, something like that. Like, yeah, it feels like standing on the edge of a cliff, like with your base jumping rig. I've never base jumped, but I just imagine standing on the edge of a cliff with a base jumping rig and like looking down, like ready to fly off, and you're like, ah, but you just go for it. That image always comes to mind when I think of John's work. So
Sweet. Sweet.
yeah,
Appreciate you giving it a go at that. And can
yeah,
you transition into the work that you're developing, the path that you've taken to be an anatomist, chiropractor as well, but somebody who's really trying to bring something new to the anatomy world?
yeah. Um, so I guess I should probably start with the story of how I got there. So while I was in school, they had gotten rid of the cadaver lab at school, and I felt that me personally, I felt that it was not okay for me to put a DR in front of my name without having an experience with a real body, and learning from a real body. That was just my personal feeling. And so I didn't accept that I didn't have that experience at life. And so I eventually found this anatomist. His name is Gil Headley. And he's maybe one of the most famous anatomists in the soft tissue bodywork worlds, but hasn't really quite. Chiropractors don't seem to know him as much, but massage therapists and Rolfers and Pilates people and yoga people know Gil really, really well. And so I took a class with him while I was a student. And it was a 6-day dissection class where the participants are the ones who did the dissection. And it was like the most beautiful, like one of the most beautiful, amazing, like learning rich experiences I ever had as a student. And so I had, after I graduated, I was working for another chiropractor and I was making pretty good money. And I paid for a class in 2020 to take another class with him in 2020. So of course the world falls apart, including my job also fell apart. And I had nowhere to go, but I had already paid for this class. So I was like, and he was still holding it. He didn't care about the world shutting down. And so I was like, well, I don't really care about the world shutting down either. I'm going to go because he's still doing it. And so I went, and he was working on a project at the time, a long-term project with that ended up being, he dissected 2 bodies over 17 months. So an incredibly long-term project. And one of his assistants was totally burned out. He was like 3 or 4 months into it. And one of his assistants was completely burned out. She was like, I can't do another single day in the lab. Like, I'm done. And that assistant noticed me cleaning some instruments. Like, I was just like, oh, I see the instruments need to be cleaned. I'm just going to clean the instruments. And she saw that and she was like, oh, him. He could replace me. Ask him, she told Gil. And so Gil asked me, would you like to stay to help me with this project? And I was like, oh my God, not only do I want to stay, I can stay because I have nothing to go back to in Atlanta. I had lost my job and the end of the world was in full swing, so I had nothing else to do. And so I was like, I would love to stay. I would love to help you. And so I ended up staying with him for 6 months. I helped him with 6 months in this project. And by the end of it, I had developed a really good relationship with him and everyone in the lab and everyone in the institute that the lab was within. I ended up opening my office in the clinic next door so that I could practice, and I had it in with the lab. And Gil gave me his blessings basically to start teaching my own courses. I helped it during those 6 months. I also helped him teach some of his 6-day courses, that I had previously signed up for as a participant. Now I was all of a sudden helping him teach them. Well, helping him teach them is probably a strong word. I was more like, the scalpel boy, but in doing laundry, but anyway, that's how I got my in. And so I started, I love his approach so much because it's outside of the box. It's not like you open up an anatomy textbook and it shows you, pec major and this one and this vein and this nerve and whatever. It's like he has a completely different way of looking at anatomy, actually. And maybe I'll just do a quick version of what that is. So what we learn in school is what we call regional anatomy. Regional anatomy means anatomy split up into regions. It's very split up and parsed out. This is where this is, and this is where this is, and this is their relation, like where they are compared to each other. But what he came up with is what he calls integral anatomy. And so integral meaning like whole. So instead of focusing on pointing out bits and naming them, the focus is on what is the texture of this tissue? What is the quality of the relationship of this tissue to the next tissue? It was very like an organic type of learning anatomy, actually. And of course, we talked a lot about the words, and this is this and this is that. So there was some regional aspect to it, but that wasn't the focus. The focus is the continuity. It's like a holistic anatomy, actually, is what it is. And that made more sense to me than I had ever heard anything about the human body. I was like, whoa. So I wanted to take that and give it to chiropractors, because we don't learn anatomy in this way. We learn regional anatomy, which is, by the way, totally stolen from the medical profession, which is fine. It's a good place to start. Like, the medical profession has made a lot of progress in anatomy research, but we don't work with the body that way. We work with the body as a holistic unity. At least that's what our philosophy is. But our education doesn't reflect that at all. The education says this is this over here, and this is this over here, and this is very separated. But it's not separated. It's just separated in our minds because of how we learn it. So I wanted to take that, and I want to give that philosophy to chiropractors. And so I've started teaching my own workshops. So, more spine focused, because Gil is not spine focused. Gil is very much a generalist. But I wanted to sort of like get a little more specific with the spine, because of course that's what the main thing that we work with. So I sort of like took his schedule and like changed it and changed the emphasis and changed how each day is broken up. It's a 6-day course. And yeah, and so that's what I've been getting into lately. I'm still helping Gil teach his classes, and I'm actually teaching some dissection classes for some other bodywork teachers. But the ones that I do for chiropractors, I'm very, very excited about. So there you go.
Can you kind of go a little bit deeper into the application of the chiropractic philosophy to how anatomy could be presented? Maybe like your proposed model of shifting the way that anatomy is organized and coordinated and constructed as a field of study for the chiropractic student and for the professional chiropractor who just has a passion for continually bathing their mind in this concept that the body is interconnected and that the spine is housing the central nervous system, and that the spine has over 120 ligaments, I believe, maybe over 100 muscles, over 100 joints. It's like extremely intricate, and the architecture is so fascinating that literally you could just spend time on one area of the spine in one joint of that area of the spine and spend a few hours on it. I'm just curious how, if you could lay it out there for a college student who's about to take an anatomy class or who is in anatomy 1 or anatomy 2, how they could shift the way that they study the spinal area or the nervous system area or the different physiological chapters to maybe get more out of it, or to make it more interesting to them, or just to make it more congruent to chiropractic?
Yeah, cool. These are awesome talking points. I hope I can remember them to go through all of them, because I'd love to go through all of those points you just made. So one, what can students do while they're in their anatomy classes, like an anatomy 1 or anatomy 2? One hint that may sound really obvious and dumb, but I'm going to say it anyway because it needs saying, that whenever you look at one page in the atlas or one slide on the PowerPoint or whatever, and it's asking about one particular thing, or in the book, it's showing one particular thing, and then on the next page, it shows like a different set of things. They're separate on the pages, but in the body, they're all layered on top of each other all simultaneously. Like I said, that might be like really self-evidently obvious, which it is. But I really want to bring an emphasis to that you have to like maybe mentally stack those things together so that you can get closer to an actual sense of how it is in a living person. Now, that's not to disparage that method, because if the map meaning the book or the PowerPoint, if the map showed everything all at once, it wouldn't be a useful map, right? The only reason maps are useful is because they disregard like 95% of the situation, so that you can highlight that 5, so that you can get that 5, right? So that's the only way maps are helpful is to negate most of it. But don't mistake the map for the territory. The map is not the territory. The map is a map. Okay, so that's one thing that I would say. Um, um, hmm. Another thing would be to come take a class with me, so that you can get a sense of, so you can get a sense of the textures and how things are. Here's something I really want to say, is that integral anatomy starts with the individual. The book doesn't start with the individual, actually. The books start with an average. And that's an important part of the books, is that the books are an average of thousands and thousands and thousands of bodies. And that's how the book is made, is to average all of that out and then put what happens most of the time. But the problem with that is that doesn't reflect anybody. Nobody looks like that. Nobody looks like the average. Everybody is who they are very specifically. So actually, I go back to what Arno and John says. What they say is to listen first. Arno and John start with, you got to listen first. Because if you don't listen, then you don't know who that person is. You just have a mental conception of what that person is. And you're going to impose that mental conception on that person without realizing that mental conception is not who they are. Everyone is very different. Like your face looks different than my face. You still have two eyes. We both have two eyes. We both have one nose. We both have one mouth. But those are shaped very differently, right? And so how can we expect the face to be so different, but the insides to be all the same? Like, no, that makes no sense. Our insides are just as varied as our outsides, actually. Everybody is different. Everybody is completely unique. And so you have to start to really understand anatomy. You have to start with the individual instead of starting with the average. And studying individuals, in the case of cadaver dissection, for example, studying individuals, especially when you do enough of them, you start to develop a range of what is possible in the human body, like, because there's all kinds of crazy stuff that can happen in there, and if you're not listening, if you're not paying attention, then you're not going to get it, and if you're thinking that, the book said it like this, so it has to be like this, then unfortunately you're going to be wrong every single time, because the book isn't the person, the map isn't the territory, the map is just a map.
I'm curious if a student has gone through figuring out what chiropractic is, why people become chiropractors. They've explored the different skill sets that chiropractors express in the real world, in their practices in life. They've gone and had experiences in offices, getting adjusted, observing adjustments, seeing how practices function and the different models and structures that people set their practices up to be like. And then they've gone and participated in a pre-chiro club, and their pre-chiro club has been super rich in its experience and opportunities that it's provided for them. And now they're approaching this capstone project, independent study, and they can go really deep for a few months on anything they really want. But I'm curious if their heart and interest is in anatomy and deepening their understanding, deepening their ability to visualize anatomy and to crystallize the inner workings of the human body through their study of anatomy. Do you have any creative prompts that somebody can take and then go spend a few months on in the context of anatomy as it relates to chiropractic or as it relates to becoming a chiropractor?
Man, that's a good question. That's a good question, Ben.
Or to even simplify it anymore, if somebody had, say, a couple of anatomy texts, they had the internet, they had this interview with you right here, and you were about to set them on a path that by the end of that 3 or 6 month period of time, they can either create a triboard for a science project fair, or they could create a reflection on what they worked on, or they could build a model of something, or they can draw something. or they could draw a series of pictures. I'm just curious how we can apply integral anatomy and the work that you're doing to pre-chiropractic students and potentially chiropractic students to enrich their experience.
Oh man. Um, the first thing that came to mind, I don't know if you'd be able to show anything for it other than what you received internally from this process. But whatever, even though that's kind of not where you went with it, maybe I'll just give that example anyway. Um, you can go, I believe, on YouTube. I believe it's still up. Arno does this thing that he calls a neurospinal assessment. And the neurospinal assessment is basically like a motion palpation exam of the spine. Palpation meaning to like feel, and motion meaning the person is in motion while you are palpating. And I think if you like made a little goal for yourself to say, okay, I'm going to do this neurospinal assessment motion palpation exercise with, 5 people a week, like friends, family, whoever who will let you touch their spine. I think that would be super rich. I do that in my practice in my office with all of my first time people. I just go through, uh, you know, right, like motioning their spine all the way up and down the whole spine, and I feel like I get a lot out of that. Actually, I feel like I learn about how spines move a lot from that exercise. And so I would say that would be a good exercise to do. See how many people you can do every week, and then over the course of whatever, like you said, 2 or 3 months, maybe you accumulate many dozens or maybe even more than 100 people that you've like felt how their spine moves. I think that'd be great, but I don't know if you'd be able to show anything for it other than your own understanding of how spines move. I think that that'd be a really worthwhile exercise.
I
Another
think
thing
that
that
that's great for chiropractic students, and I would love for you to kind of build on that, but go backwards and say, okay, maybe somebody hasn't even gotten any of the basic palpation skills, let alone motion palpation skills. I think what you just described is an excellent capstone independent study project for chiropractic students if they have time and capacity and bandwidth to
mm,
go off for several months and just focus on doing what you described. But I'm curious if we're in the theoretical still, if we haven't quite gotten to that practical, but we've kind of gotten a little taste of it, and we want to maybe develop a body of work or a piece of information that could be used maybe by pre-chiro clubs around the world, or that could be used to help other students learn anatomy of the neurospinal system. How can we creatively promote students to go off and develop content and develop stuff that could potentially inspire other students to have a deepening interest in the neurospinal system?
mm, man, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Well, okay, here's one thing that comes to mind. Um, find uh just idea that popped into my mind. Find 3 different anatomy atlases, maybe a Netter, a Gray, and a Tima or something, and then go to the spinal muscles, for example, but almost really any page would work, and then see how the 3 artists drew the same structure differently. And then maybe you can recreate and like highlight the differences between those 3 books, highlight the differences between those 3 sets of images, because I guarantee you they're all different. Uh, I have exhaustively proved that to myself because I've been spending a lot of time looking at atlases in the lab and comparing. We use maybe 5 different atlases in the lab, and then of course there's the body on the table, and so we compare all of the books with what's on the table, and every single time, every single source is different. So I just find that to be cool. And maybe a project could be to highlight what those differences are between the books. And through that process, what you would get out of it is an understanding of maybe a little bit of the variation of the average, a variation of the average, which isn't a variation of the individual. It's a variation of the average, but that's fine. It's good information. So you would learn the variations. And because you did the same thing 3 times, like the erector spinae group, for example, the erector spinae muscle group, by the time you did that 3 times, and you would know that set really well. So there you go. Maybe that's a project. What do you think about that?
And as we transition and segue to the end of this conversation, thank you for that, by the way. I really appreciate you playing along and just doing your best to support the progression and the evolution of pre-chiropractic studies, chiropractic student studies. I think we need to ask these sort of open-ended questions to people such as yourself more often that, have specialized knowledge and can help students get inspired by showing them what's possible. Given your awareness, given your understanding and your experience, you see the things that could have the biggest return on time invested if a student takes it seriously and goes down that path. And if we could just segue now to like where you're at presently, the structure that you've been able to set up in your life, how your week to week is looking, and how you envision it progressing over time.
Yeah, totally, totally. So what my life is looking like right now is I split my time between practice and time in the laboratory, and also teaching in the classroom. I teach anatomy and physiology at a massage therapy program, and then hanging out in the mountains because I live in Colorado, like we've mentioned, and really, other than the lab, the main reason why I'm here is because of the mountains. I really, really love the mountains. So I and all of it's fun. That's the thing that I love about what I do, is that I have fun in every single one of those areas of my life. I love practicing, I love teaching, I love being in the lab, and I love being in the mountains. So I'm kind of like split up between those things right now. And actually, at the moment, I'm kind of in an interesting juncture because I've been doing 3 days a week in the lab since January. So that's almost 5 months now that I've been doing 3 days a week in the lab working on another long term project with Gil. Um, and it's very cool for chiropractors actually because it's a nervous system dissection, something that Gil has never done before, something that none of us have ever done before. Is basically take everything away except for the nervous system and see how the nerves are in relationship with the fascia, see how the nerves are in relationship with the muscles, see how the nerves are in relationship with the skeletal system. This like super deep dive on the nervous system is what we've been doing for 5 months. And that's just about over. So now all of a sudden I have 3 days of my week back that I'm going to be able to go back to practice full time instead of part time. And yeah, sort of like maybe focus a little more on my business endeavors instead of helping Gil with his project, which is kind of our project in a way. But anyway, so yeah, that's kind of what my life is like right now, and I'm very grateful to be in this position.
Can we just deepen the conversation for a brief moment about the nervous system and the nerve structures, neuroplastic change, taking care of your body over a lifetime, and what a cadaver's nervous system might look like with a body that's healthy versus a body that's sick? And maybe you have some insights at this point of neurological differences in structure. Obviously, we can't see how it was functioning, but I'm curious if you can maybe throw a couple of words that are maybe out here over our head into the conversation about myelination, demyelination, nerve. I won't even use any other words. Maybe you can finish my thought for me of just kind of how we can create like a really deep conversation about the nerve system and maybe some different characteristics that are learned through the dissection and anatomy work that you've been doing.
Yeah, totally, totally. So, something that I has always struck me about dissection work is how much the musculoskeletal system like retains its beauty and like perfection despite that person having died. But the internal organs, I can't say that about. I can't say that about the internal organs. Brains can look really weird. Hearts, lungs, and intestines and livers can look very weird when the death process happens. But the musculoskeletal nervous system seems to always be beautiful, except the brain, I guess. Like I said, except the brain. The brain can look weird when there's brain issues. But the nerves that come out of the spinal cord and the muscles that they plug into seem to always be very. They don't seem to change much with the death process, like the other things that I mentioned do. So I find that interesting. That's maybe not something that I would have quite expected. You know, the muscles to be perfect, the nerves to be perfect, and then the liver to be like a mess, something like that. So I don't really know quite what to make of that practically. I just know that that's what I see. Um, Demyelination diseases like multiple sclerosis or Guillain-Barré, dementia, Alzheimer's, we can see that kind of stuff in the lab. At the brain level, though, even the spinal cord, maybe I need to get better with my spinal cord stuff, because spinal cords are very difficult to get a good look at because of how well protected they are. The spinal cord and the brain those are the two most difficult things to see in the lab because of how incredibly well protected they are, which says something about their importance, maybe. They are like housed within this incredible armor. But anyway, so
Do you remember Dr. Alf Breg and the work he did? Does that ring a bell?
it doesn't ring a bell. Tell me about it.
Well, Donnie Epstein developed network spinal analysis based on the work of Dr. Alf Breg, who is a neurosurgeon turned dissector who dissected hundreds of spinal columns and looked at the cross-section diameter of spinal cords in people who had hyperkyphotic spines and were really in a flexion compressed state versus people that had healthy curves in their neck and low back and spines, and identified just that the cross section of the spinal cord was a lot smaller in people that were flexed versus people that were in more neutral extended positions, and deduced that the anterior spinal arteries actually supplied much more healthy amounts of blood to the vital organs and the limbs in the spinal columns that had the curves sustained or maintained over a lifetime versus those that had lost the curves. And as you know, and I know, the vast majority of the population in today's world have that sort of reverse cervical lordosis, where there's extreme amounts of straightening and even reverse curves happening, which changes the amount of blood flow going to the brain, the organs, and the limbs.
Well, that's a fascinating study. Those are very, very specific types of studies that I haven't had the opportunity to do those types of like hyper specific studies, because
This guy, by the way, this guy was so impactful on the chiropractic profession that Simon Senzon, who wrote all those white books, he wrote a book on Alf Breg Revisited and detailed all the work that this individual did to uncover that relationship.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's great. That's great. I really hope that one day I have the opportunity to do these kinds of like specific studies. Because right now, the way I sort of have been structuring my teaching is like as general as I can possibly make it while still giving emphasis onto the spine. And so, we spend like a good, maybe like 4 days on the rest of the body and then maybe like 2 days on the spine. And so it's, and my spinal work tends to be more on the joints actually, rather than the spinal cord, because, as you know, chiropractic adjustments are they're all about the joints basically, and like getting motion into those joints as an access into the nervous system, right? And so that's kind of where my focus has been on the facet joints and the disc joints. But that'd be super cool to do like some spinal cord studies. I would love that. And I didn't know that that's where Donnie Epstein came up with his network work. That's awesome. That's a cool story.
So, as we wrap up here, if you could maybe just kind of speak to that elementary school student, middle school student who has an interest in anatomy or who has an interest in the human body, and maybe connect their interest in anatomy and the human body to this path of becoming a chiropractor?
Yeah. Hmm. I would say check out Gil's work online. You can go to his website, gilheadley.com, and he has tons of stuff for free. He also has tons of stuff on his YouTube channel. Not all cadaver based. Some of it is like whiteboard based, where he draws with a dry erase marker, you know, and he'll like teaches that way. But he also has quite a bit of real body stuff on his YouTube channel as well as what he calls the Integral Anatomy series, which is a 7-hour, split up over many videos, a 7-hour journey into the human body, kind of like from skin to spinal cord. And it's not really quite chiropractic focused. It's more just like human body focused. So maybe it won't really quite take people in the chiropractic direction unless that's what they feel within anyway. Like that's what when I see that stuff, I think of helping my people on my table, you know. So someone else might think of something else, but if there's a chiropractic inclination and a body inclination, which I would hope that both of those things are happening in your mind at the same time, I would definitely say check out Gil's stuff on YouTube or his website, Gil Headley. And you'll get the human body from this holistic perspective with a sense of gratitude for who we are as people and how our bodies are designed by this just incredibly beautiful intelligence. You're going to get all that kind of stuff. And it's just like a beautiful introduction into the human body, you know, going all the way through. And you're going to learn a lot. I've gone through it maybe 3 or 4 times and I learn new stuff every time. So, yeah, that's my first thought of where to send people.
Well, thank you so much for taking time to share with any students today. If you could maybe just share your info as we get off of this broadcast.
Yeah. My website is integratechiro.com. And I'm going to be putting some education stuff up on there, but for now it's just kind of like my chiropractic website. But I do have, you know, I'll have some education stuff on there. And if you'd like to come hang out at my office or come hang out at the lab for that matter, you know, you can find me in Colorado Springs.